So welcome back to the show. Today we have two gentlemen on the call, rather in my house today, more interestingly enough. For the first time we are doing this in my house. I will leave them to introduce themselves, but they are definitely one of our top guys from VMware in Singapore. So yeah, welcome Mark and Clement to the show. Why not you guys introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Mark, I'll let you go first.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I am actually working in VMware for the last 8 years. So in the IT industry for about close to slightly more than a decade. So much of what I do is revolving around the cloud management business within the Southeast Asia and Korea context. Help to drive the business for VMware SIG in that light. My passion lies in technology. I do quite a fair bit of work revolving around Smart Nation initiatives, collaborating with the government and so on. And Clement has been a buddy of mine for the last 8 years as well. So learned a great deal from him. And likewise, Charles, love to collaborate with him over the last 3 to 4 years as well. So happy to be here.
Yeah.
Right, Clement?
First of all, I want to thank Charles for inviting me to be able to share some of my experience today, and also my buddy over here, Mark, who have been working very, very closely for the past 8 years. So I'm a cloud solution strategist here at VMware, taking care of the Asia Pacific region. I'm also the technical lead in the cloud management business in VMware for Asia Pacific and Japan. And a lot of the things that I'm trying to do right now is helping customers to manage away from the cloud silos as they move towards their cloud strategy, hybrid cloud strategy, or multi-cloud strategy. How do we help them consume these different cloud environments or cloud platforms in a much more seamless fashion? Yeah.
All right. So with regards to cloud management business unit, right, which is the business unit you guys are from, there's a lot of confusion with regards to what cloud management is. I mean, we loosely use the term cloud, right? So in the essence of what VMware does in CMBU for short, what does it entails in the cloud management business unit for you guys? What kind of solutions are you guys looking after specifically?
Well, I would say maybe let me take this one. In general, we can attribute, if you look at the traditional systems management space, it's essentially around helping large organizations manage multiple disparate systems that sits across their data centers, or now you call it cloud. And I think where VMware is going in cloud management is we're taking the same discipline that we used to do with server virtualization. We help to manage the x86 servers that used to be siloed, right? Before virtualization, you walk into the data center, you see a lot of different operating system-centric silos. And the new silos today is cloud. And I think within VMware's cloud management business, what we are taking on is how can we do the same thing that we did with x86, but now we do it for VMware Cloud, we do it for AWS, we do it for Azure, and all of the different cloud platforms out there that many large organizations are using today.
So, having come from SolarWinds prior to joining VMware for about 2.5 years of tenure within SolarWinds, we see that the industry has to customers have to deal with heterogeneity of systems, right? So much to what Clement mentioned, from large-scale systems all the way to cloud systems these days, the world is getting a lot more complex, and a lot of startups and a lot of obviously VMware as well. We're trying to unify the experience of managing all this heterogeneity and the complexity that sits in across different environments within the world. So it's really to try to simplify that whole experience.
In a layman, we are just trying to make all these clouds invisible, right?
Right.
We're trying to make all these clouds invisible so that organizations can really focus on what is important, which is the business.
VMware has gone on a shopping spree recent times, bought a lot of companies. So in the portfolio of CMBU, what specifically is in that portfolio? What are the name of the solutions? So just kind of throw out a couple of names just so everybody can get a feel for what it is.
We've acquired Cloud Health a couple of years back, And Cloud Health is really helping our customers with regards to their public cloud visibility and governance and control, especially when it comes to costing and billing. Because a lot of times enterprises, they get into public cloud and they start using those services and they start to see the cost escalating. And in large enterprises where there are a lot of different users who are consuming different cloud services, there isn't really a lot of visibility into those services, right? And what our customers want ultimately is to kind of unify the visibility and the governance across clouds and bring that under control, right? From a cost perspective and to drive optimization along the way.
Does a smaller customer benefit from any of this? Because we talk a lot about public clouds, how easy it is to consume, the public cloud is the future, la 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 la, and the list goes on, right? But it's always seemed to be an inhibitor for smaller players. And likewise, to your point, if let's say a smaller player would want to kind of get the economics of a public cloud, is there room for that? Does that make sense? Or, how does cloud management plays into that entire equation?
I think definitely. Traditionally, like what you just mentioned, Charles, the system management play is typically appealing more towards the large enterprises. And that is where I think VMware is trying to solve. How can we bring enterprise-grade CMP to the likes of all organizations or all enterprises today, big, small, large, and so on. And the first thing we did is, yes, it is a platform, but we can break it down into different modules that customers can consume throughout the different stages of their journey. I'll give you one good example is a lot of times when most organizations first start off with their cloud management journey, they're looking at things like how can I optimize capacity, how do I optimize performance, how do I look at compliance, how do I make sure that the clouds are running fine, right? And so we have something called vRealize operations that fixes those problems. And then as these customers mature, right, they go into a more focus on the cloud experience, the stakeholders, the developers or applications users that they serve. They need a lot more things like lifecycle management of those cloud assets, right? They need to look at automation, they need to look at governance, they need to look at global policies. And that is where vRealize automation comes in. And bear in mind, all these modular components are tightly integrated once they have the full platform, right? And I'm very happy to share that, recently in VMware 2020, we just acquired a new company called Saltstack. And Saltstack will allow us to, again, reach out to those customers that are looking at state enforcement, right, which is a huge topic in the market today, especially when it comes to cloud, right? How do I enforce the various state of my workloads? How do I look at config management? How do I look at SecOps? How do I look at NetSecOps? And I think by having that into the cloud management business in VMware, it really enhances our capabilities to address more organizations, both large and small.
Talking about Saltstack, right? We know in ASEAN's context or Southeast Asia and Korea, it's largely the Ansibles of the world, the puppets and chefs and whatnot. What do you see? How do you see the penetration of Saltstack in our region? And is it something that you foresee it's on the lower side of the fence and it's up and coming? What's your thoughts around that?
Here's a fun fact. Yes, Saltstack in terms of the enterprise commercial offering, we do not see much traction in paying customers. But if you look at statistics, Salt is a open source community, right? And Saltstack is a commercial offering. If you look at Salt and you benchmark it across Ansible and the rest of the other config management space, Salt is actually ranked number 2 in terms of open source contribution. We have around 3,000 members, right? And out of these 3,000 members, a very small subset are Saltstack employees, right? So which means that the public community is huge. And and we have over the thousands of commits. And if you look at past month, we still have very active issues. And the rate that we resolve those issues are really quick. We solve around 80% of those issues. And so if you look at that perspective, it's a very vibrant community in Salt.
And I'll just add on to what Clement mentioned, and I completely agree with him that in the, I guess, SMB space or not non-large enterprise setting, right, a lot of times open source toolings will thrive, right? And you get to see SMB stakeholders using open source tools like Terraform, Ansible open source, Salt. And I think all this will fundamentally help to drive innovation, even though they are in the SMB space with limited capital and budget and so on. But at the same time, having to run your own systems, much like, for example, vRealize automation and whatnot, while it unlocks governance and automation capabilities, sometimes SMB folks might find that getting to run and operate those environments are going to be daunting, and that's why we fundamentally feel that SaaS is actually going to change the way that we deliver those capabilities to SMB owners, right? Simply because SaaS, you leave the manageability, the life cycle of the systems to us, and you simply consume them. And the beauty of it is that earlier we mentioned all the open source toolings that are popular within the region. We are going to be able to help to unify all these different open source toolings and bring it into the mix, provide governance on top of it, provide state management on top of it, and cost visibility and control on top of it. And that's the beauty of our platform, is to be able to bring all these components in as first class citizens, delivering value as SaaS, right? So that's I feel will be a huge potential within the region.
Actually, I want to kind of touch on SaaS, right? Obviously, it's the buzzword these days, right, with regards to SaaS. And VMware is obviously trajecting towards SaaS with as much of our offerings, if you like, right? And I think the latest ones generally was vRealize and SaaS offerings. How are we doing on that front generally? And I also kind of want to understand what do you think is the biggest inhibitor for people wanting to go on a SaaS platform?
The common theme is the operating model, because SaaS fundamentally changes not just how you consume the product or solution or the whatever the technical capabilities that you get, but it also changes the way you operate as an organization. How you not only the processes that will change, the way your procurement will change, the way you budget for projects will change. So if I would say, it's not just one business unit within the organization is impacted. It's a lot of the other I would say adjacent line of business that will be impacted as well for SaaS. So I would say that that is probably the number one theme I keep hearing over and over again.
Do you see security as an issue?
I would say data locality will be perhaps stand out as one of the most commonly asked for when it comes to adopting SaaS, especially when you are a regulated company or organization like the government, or if you are in the banking industry. But you're right? Security is something that stands out as one of the top priority.
Let's talk a little bit about containers. I think not a day goes by these days that we don't speak about containers in any form or shape. I always say that. And I mean, just to the portfolio of what we do as solutioning at VMware, historically has always been around VMs, and our automation and toolings have always been around VMs. So what are we specifically doing with containers? Specific to cloud management, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to cloud management in the lens of containers, there's a few things, right? we think at VMware, containers should not be any different when it comes to virtual machines or any cloud, because they are at the end of the day running business functions or providing a business outcome. So they should not be managed any differently, right? In terms of the objective, right? It's all about, do I have enough resource, right? Do I have enough capacity? Are they deployed properly, right? What kind of workloads am I running? What kind of applications am I running? The techniques of managing them is different, of course, right? But the approach should not be any different. So I think within cloud management, we are trying to bring that same approach, not just for VMs, but for containers as well, so that customers don't have to go into different tooling sprawls, different tools to manage different kinds of workloads.
I agree with Clement. The problems, the principles behind managing, be it whether it's a container or it's a VM, is ultimately quite similar. The challenges might be different, but you when you look at operating the life cycle of all these systems, right? They are almost identical, right? So what we want is visibility and control, and the ability to troubleshoot when needed. So it's about unifying the experience regardless of the workload type.
Am I right to say also they want to? I mean, we foresee a future that there is VMs and containers. We don't actually necessarily foresee a future that is, 100% containers. Neither do we see a large part of it being VMs, right? So I think the future of coexistence and co-correlation between both are actually quite crucial. I don't know what you guys think of that.
Absolutely. I mean, no doubt, yes. The growth of container is definitely much more exponential compared to VM growth. But VM growth is still growing year on year, right? If you look at some of the statistics, virtual machine growth is still pretty healthy. But yes, containers is definitely having an exponential growth. And so if you look at the next 5 years, there's definitely going to be a place where both of them have to coexist, right? And when you have coexistence, then you need singularity in terms of how we can manage them.
I agree, and the reason why we launched back then, known as Project Pacific, is really because we have such a large install base of vSphere customers already running on our platform, and their application teams are moving towards containers. They are identifying certain applications to move into a container form factor, going into microservices and whatnot. So more often than not, what we hear from our customers are that they don't necessarily want to build a separate silo system just to host containers, and it could be a nightmare from a day-to operations angle, which is why with that announcement of Project Pacific, now known as vSphere with Tanzu, we want to unify the operating model, right? Is ultimately to simplify the operating model so that regardless whether you're running VMs or containers, we can help you to scale that as you grow without fundamentally actually changing too much, right? And that is huge for a lot of our customers, and I know that they appreciate it.
Okay, so on the topic of containers, I mean, of course, we work for VMware. Understandably, we want the VM side to grow, like what Clemens mentioned. I mean, in your viewpoint, being having many chats with customers, discussion points, where do you see the split being? Like, what's the split going to be like in the next couple of years? I know it's going to be exponential in many sense, right? But what do you think the mix is going to be like? Do you see a mix which is 50-50, or do you kind of still see maybe an 80-20 or 60-40 kind of mix with VMs and containers?
This is a great question, but I would spin it the other way instead. Is among the containers that we see today, how many containers in production? I think that should be the question that we should all be asking. I'm not saying that it's not a significant amount. It is a large amount if you look at Asia Pacific region. But looking at the entirety of itself, I would say it's just probably maybe 20-30% containers in production, because a lot of large enterprises are still experimenting with containers, right? They're still experimenting what types of application, right? Because we're not talking about startup here. We're talking about large enterprises that have a lot of legacy or heritage workloads, right? And then they have different application frameworks, and then they have different strategy to move applications, right, into a more modernized. Do I modernize my data center, or do I do a lift and shift model, or do I look at refactoring, re-architecture, or do go straight cloud native? And this is an organization-wide conversation, right? And because of that, containers will slowly seep into more production grade workloads, and VMware is trying to help, right? VMware is trying to bring that experience to customers because we run the largest private cloud enterprise in the world. I would say we have the largest market share, and we just want to bring that same best of breed, right, for consistent infrastructure. Should customers or organizations are ready to run containers in production, we have something that they can do today.
I think the ratio is not necessarily the most important thing that is at play right now, because I think more importantly, we recognize that the momentum is going to take place. Containers is going to be on the rise, and for the next 5 years. I think more importantly, when it comes to containers, what we see across the globe and also in the region is that customers are identifying what type of applications to move to containers, right, and to split into microservices. More often than not, we see them targeting the new services rather than looking at existing services, right? Unless fundamentally the existing services they are bumping a lot of problems with regards to redundancy and so on, and it's a massive turnkey application. But with that also comes a fair amount of resources to try to refactor them, right, and to containerize them.
I think definitely if you're talking about the next 2 to 3 years, it's still going to be the 80-20, right? 80-20 split. I don't see that it's going to overtake, right, or even be a part in the near term future, right? But I think back to your statement is coexistence. It's definitely going to be coexistence. There will be in no shape and form that I can foresee that VMs will be totally 100% gone.
Yeah, I totally agree. Having sat in for a lot of customer conversations and projects where they need the platform to be container ready, but at the same time not being able to identify the right set of applications to be container ready. I think that's fundamentally the challenge in terms of shifting, right? To your point, Charles, when you say that in terms of the container movement, it boils down to whether or not you have the right set of developers and the talent pool to help you to create all these new microservices. So in smaller enterprises or in smaller companies where you're inhibited by resources and so on, I think that it will take a while. Yeah. For sure.
I mean, some of the customers that I spoke to about automation, the first thing that comes to mind is like, whoa, this is going to be complex, right? And they kind of rescind on that whole discussion on automation. But here's the irony of it, right? Automation is supposed to be simplistic, one click, get all this done. But why is there such a perception that automation is complex? I mean, you guys deal with this discussion point every day. So I just want to kind of, maybe bust the myth or maybe just get your viewpoint on it. And yeah.
I think it boils down to the persona that needs the automation capabilities, right? So for example, if you are just an end user and you just need to run a set of services in the cloud, and you just needed that self-service approach, I don't necessarily want to go through the lengthy process of getting IT to do a lot of things. And if you are that persona, automation capabilities can be unlocked for you, and the ability to do that is actually quite easy, right? And if you are a developer and you can't care less about, you can't care more about infrastructure at all, you don't want to necessarily deal with it. I mean, there are a lot of different platforms for you to simply just do code check-in, just constantly develop new code and update existing services and so on, without necessarily getting your hands dirty on infrastructure, right? So that's what we fundamentally want to do for some of these different personas. But however, if you belong to the dark side of cloud architects and cloud engineers, are people who create the service to make that magic happen for the end users, I would say that a lot of the challenges would fall, and also resources would fall greatly on the initial boot up phase, right? Creating that service, designing that service, and managing that service along the way constantly, right? So whether from a funding perspective or from a resource perspective, it's all done when you're in the midst of setting up, right? Things like multi-cloud. How can you expect it to be simple? You look at all the hyperscalers, they are running their operations differently. They have different form factors for everything. Images, sizes, and networks, security groups. You name it, they have all different kinds of way of defining their own services. And those are complex, right? If you pass that on to the layman end user who just needed to consume those service, they're going to complain. So ultimately, for the cloud architects, the beginning ramp-up phase is going to be a little bit challenging, but our platform aims to simplify that onboarding process for the cloud architects so that they can create those services quickly for their end users. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And just one small point just to add is also, why is it so complex is if you look at the history of automation, everything starts from scripts, right? And then from scripts, then you go into orchestration, you go into workflows, then you go into declarative state, and declarative provisioning, templates, and so on and so forth. It gets more complex because we're trying to bring in more into the mix, right? Previously, it could be just server automation, right? And I just do a script on the server, and then storage automation. But now we are going into process. We're going to actually an IT service delivery process, and then it becomes complicated because different stakeholders have different needs, have different objectives, have different inputs and outputs. So and there's no one person that knows everything in a large organization, right? So it can get complex.
Totally agree. And one more point to add on is that SaaS is going to cut down that initial ramp-up phase by at least 30%.
So just to wrap up this particular session, before we move on to the next one, just to leave you guys with the last one, what do you see is in store? I mean, maybe you can guys kind of share a little bit about futures or direction where cloud management at VMware is heading towards.
Obviously, one of the vision that we have is in the very early on when I talk about is making clouds invisible. But we want to take beyond that. What we are looking at is we've always been viewed as only for VMware, right? Our cloud management was only for VMware. First thing is we want to make it that, yes, we will continue to invest in making sure that we can manage VMware Cloud extremely well, right? Whether or not is it within an organization's environment, a partner environment, or a VMware's cloud environment with AWS, Azure, Google, and so on and so forth. Second thing is we also want to look at infrastructure management and lifecycle, right? The workloads and so on and so forth. And that has been something that we've been doing for a very long time. And we want to expand that to the multi-cloud world. And the new area that we are really starting to explore is ad management, right? How can we look at providing not just an infrastructure, automation, management, lifecycle platform? We want to start looking at application lifecycle, application management, application provisioning, application data as well. Yeah,
we are moving towards the direction of harnessing machine learning techniques and algorithms and frameworks to actually help our customers to be able to move up the value chain, right? Ultimately, with all the data center configurations and cloud configurations that's happening, we will definitely move towards a direction whereby we are trying to automate as much as possible, run scenarios with machines, in this case with the huge data sets within the data center and the cloud. How do you get machines to churn out all the different scenarios and the different permutations, right? What's the outcome of changing a specific configuration, for example, and how does that impact your SLA or your SLO, right? So I think definitely that will be one of the key things which we will be investing heavily in, and the outcome and the end goal is really to help the usual cloud operator to be able to make higher value decisions than having to go into the needle. I mean go into the haystack and try to look for that needle specifically and try to troubleshoot a whole bunch of stuff, because those stuff can be uplifted, right? I mean, and try to make it a lot more simpler.
All right, so thanks again for both of you for your insights with regards to cloud management and with containers and whatnot. So for those who kind of want to stay tuned for part 2, we're going to talk a little bit about their career, how far they've come at VMware, a little bit of advice if you would like. So check in again shortly. So see you.